Well, hello there, my friends. Thank you very much for joining me today. I want to give a shout out to Allie and Violet, who listen to Stand Up every day as they go for a walk. Violet is Allie's beautiful dog. Thank you guys for joining me. Yesterday was a bad day. I talked about it. I mentioned it was a bad day. And so many people reached out, and I almost felt bad about saying it because it wasn't that bad. I like to tell you when I have good days and bad days and good things happen or bad things happen because I want to be able to relate to everybody listening. I want to be able to be human. And frankly, a lot of you give me really good advice. But I really appreciate your thoughtfulness. But it wasn't a bad. I said I got in a fight with my friend about politics. It was like gray and dreary and some other minor things happened and argue with my daughter or something. But today was a really, really good day. Like the best day ever. So I'm very happy to tell you why now, because many of you have been along the ride with me for a long time. Some of you, since my older daughter, Ava, was born, and this story is about her. I say story, and that makes you think, oh my God, what is he going to launch into? It's good. It ends really, really well. So after I got let go from Sirius, they didn't renew my contract, they canned me, whatever you want to call it. They just basically walked up to the mound and made me hand them the ball, is the metaphor I like to go with, because my boss, who ended up breaking the news to me, did it basically, he was crying. He was so upset. So it wasn't ugly, but it certainly was the hardest thing I dealt with, because that was a great corporate job with corporate benefits that allowed me this awesome work-life balance. But I realized later on how much I was missing from the rest of my life, having that commute and working at a big company and corporation and having to worry about the constant concern of the office politics and how you take care of everybody's egos and all of that. Did I mention the commute? Because that really sucked. Anyway, shortly after losing my job and my health insurance, my daughter was diagnosed with scoliosis, or we knew she had scoliosis, but she was in for her checkup and her annual checkup, and they said, wow, the curve in her spine has progressed very bad. And it was at 34 degrees. At 40 degrees, it means you got to have surgery, and that's rough for a lot of reasons. So many of you reached out to me at that time. I mean, I'd lost my health insurance. My daughter now has this health issue. We're all healthy, and of course, as soon as you lose your insurance, you have a health issue of some sort or other. It wasn't a really expensive thing because the main expense was the brace, but the therapy too. But my dad helped me out with that. Thank you, Dad. My dad's amazing and is really tight with the girls and was devastated as we were over it. Anyway, she got put in the back brace in March, the week after the world shut down for the pandemic and school was closed. Her biggest concern really was having to wear a back brace, as it would be for any 16-year-old young woman. And so she had to wear this brace for 18 hours a day. Every day. She wore it to bed. And she had to work out and do her physical therapy and see a physical therapist. But she had to wear this thing through the summer on hot days. And it's awful. It's the shell, this piece that she has to wear. And every time I looked at it or touched it, when I touched her, I was reminded that I felt like I was to blame. I could have done something more by listening to my wife, who thought she needed treatment earlier. And we both kind of dropped the ball on watching it, and it got away from us, basically. And it was just so hard. I blamed myself in a huge way. Well, today she had her checkup a year later, and something happened that wasn't even, we didn't even know it could happen. We weren't told that the back brace would, is this interesting? This is why you're listening to the show. It's such a good story. I really wanted to share it with you because it's such an amazing, amazing feeling. I've been crying all day about it. We were told that the back brace would stop, hopefully it would stop the curve of the spine from continuing. That would be the best case scenario. Therapy, exercise, and wearing the brace. It would keep the as she grows, she continues to grow. She's got a couple more years of growth, probably, hopefully, and it would stop this brace, the spine from curving. And so, if you don't like this, fast forward. We'll get to the news and get to the interviews, which are great. We were never told. I never had heard, and I didn't do enough research, which I should have. I do so much research on everything and not necessarily my daughter's health issue, that the curve could be reduced, that through wearing the brace and therapy, that the curve could actually regress, go back, become straighter, a straighter spine. She got her x-ray today. Her curve went from 34 degrees, ladies and gentlemen, to 20 degrees. And it's all a testament to, well, science, her dedication, and who knows what else. And so all of my guilt that I felt for not doing more, not all of it, but I mean, it was never serving me from the moment I started feeling it. A lot of smart people gave me that advice. But the feeling of knowing that she's going to have a fairly normal straight spine, that you can't see it, and that it's not going to cause her pain is, for the rest of her life. So many of you have contacted me over the years and talked about even losing a child or having serious illness like cancer. And I've heard those stories, and I've heard about the struggle with health insurance, and I know how fortunate we are and how lucky we are. But I wanted to share that story because it's such good news. It's such a good story. And I hope you can hear, and I know you can, the sincere joy in my voice. Today was a good day. And it's also a reminder, the best day potentially. And it's also a reminder of just uncertainty. And so that when you are so concerned and so anxious about a thing, or a billion things for me, like all kinds of things just bouncing around in my brain, I'm just so often reminded of this quote from Eckhart Tolle. The primary cause of unhappiness is never the situation, but the thought about it. Be aware of the thoughts you are thinking. Separate them from the situation, which is always neutral. It is what it is. I can always, by the way, take apart that. I don't think a quote is perfect, but that one I do come back to a lot. The primary cause of unhappiness is never the situation, but the thought about it. If a situation got even better than I thought was possible, I didn't even know that it could regress, but that's what happened. And I never thought that was going to happen. And it was the hardest kind of adversity that I've had as a parent, for sure. Losing my job, my dad having a heart attack, then losing vision in one of his eyes, and then Ava's diagnosis, and then the pandemic. And I thought, well, we're done making any kind of money. Both my wife and I, literally, there was no, we were almost laughing. It's like, oh my gosh, our entire ability to create, make money that we relied upon, both of us, is gone. That didn't happen either. For both of us, that also has worked out well. I had more time to dedicate to the podcast. I went daily. You came to the show, and so many of you have paid for the show and supporting me and this family. So I wanted to share that with you because so many of you are friends of mine, and I could contact many of you and tell you individually, but I am so happy, and we are so happy, and we are celebrating this, and I want to celebrate it with you. Those of you who are members of the community will celebrate it on Thursday, and anything else that you have to celebrate. I'm always happy to hear people's great news in their lives. Of course, there's plenty of suffering for all of us. You can always find that. Sometimes the joy can be more difficult. So when you have it right in front of you, hold it, be in it, be with it, and share it. I like it. I like when I hear about your joy, your happiness, your triumphs, your children growing up and succeeding. I actually love it. So send it my way. And I hope to see you on Thursday night to talk more all about it. I'm sure you'll email me and tweet me, and I ahead of time thank you. Thank you for sharing my joy. It was just a wonderful day. I'm not going to cry. I cried plenty all day. All right. Now, let's get to the show. I've got two excellent guests joining me today. One of my all-time favorite columnists and thought leaders and thinkers is Michael Cohen. He's a longtime columnist at the Boston Globe. I so often don't agree with him, and then I read him, and he makes a lot of sense to me about so many issues. He's got a new Substack that's great, newsletter. It's called Truth and Consequences, and he joins me. And my other guest is Dr. Jen Ditrapani. She is a veterinarian down in Florida. She and her husband own 3 animal hospitals in Florida, and she is also a longtime listener and subscriber to the show. And there's so many smart people, thoughtful people who are great at communicating and answering my questions about things and life and work and whatever they do. And so I want to have more of you guys on. So if you'd like to be a guest on the show, and you're, in this case, Jen's a veterinarian, and she's super smart and really cool, and we had an awesome conversation. But if you're someone that has, a lot of experience or credibility, if you're a professor, if you are whatever you are, every one of you is an expert in something, I'd love to talk to you here on the show, because that's the other thing I want to do is I always want to have great, smart guests to talk about what's happening in the world and America and our communities, and learn about that and what we can do to change that and how we can connect. But I want to talk with people about everyday things too. And it was National Pet Day, and so I thought that would be great to talk to Jen again. She has been on the podcast once before. I saw her last Thursday night virtually at the Hangout, and I said, I've got a billion questions for you. So we had a great conversation. Michael Cohen and Dr. Jen Ditrapani, and you right now. Let's do it. The last 24 hours in news. Well, a lot happened yesterday, as it always does now, because we have a billion media outlets reporting all things, and so you kind of know what's happening around the world, and I try to cover it here in about 20 minutes, sometimes more. I thought it was really interesting news that Joe Biden announced the withdrawal of all American troops from Afghanistan by September 11th. I think that I listened to Joe Biden give a speech in memorial of the Capitol Hill police officer who died, Billy Evans, and I was moved to tears by that. I did, like I said, a lot of crying yesterday for different reasons. As I listen to that, I'll play some of that for you. Of course, there's plenty to talk about with police violence against black folks out in Minnesota. The Derek Chauvin case continues through the week, and the defense has started today. So now people are getting rightfully upset to hear, is anybody defending this guy? But that's how it works, due process in the United States of America, and that's a good thing. But the biggest story yesterday had to be the CDC and FDA recommending a pause in the use of the Johnson & Johnson coronavirus vaccine after 6 women developed an extremely rare disorder involving blood clots, and one apparently died. Now, more than 6.8 million people in the U.S. have received the Johnson & Johnson vaccine without any serious adverse reactions. So that is a pretty good record. 6 people in 6.8 million had clots. 1 died. 1. By the way, right now we have no evidence of anybody dying as a result directly of the vaccines. I've heard that there was. I've heard that there wasn't. If you have any evidence of that, by all means, send it to me, standupwithpete@gmail.com. But we don't, as far as I can tell. So in a statement to the CDC and FDA said that the move to temporarily halt administration of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine was out of an abundance of caution. Scientists will examine possible links between the vaccine and the blood clot disorder and determine whether the FDA should continue to authorize the use of the vaccine or modify the authorization. The White House said that the pause would not have a significant impact on our vaccination plan to administer 200 million shots by the end of April. Here's White House COVID-19 coordinator Jeff Zients.
Let me start by saying that this announcement will not have a significant impact on our vaccination program. We have more than enough supply of Pfizer and Moderna vaccines to continue the current pace of about 3 million shots per day.
Here now is Dr. Anthony Fauci.
The pause not only allows us to take a look at the cases and learn more, but it is also a signal out there to help the physicians. So you're talking about tens and tens and tens of millions of people who've received vaccine with no adverse effect. This is a really rare event.
Here's more from Fauci on MSNBC at 8 p.m. last night with Chris Hayes.
Well, Chris, it goes both ways, really, because, you could say this is going to have a negative impact on the issue of hesitancy. But on the other hand, it may actually work in the opposite direction because people want to know that safety is a very important issue. Often, when people are hesitant, they say, I'm not really sure that this was really carefully looked at. Is it really safe?
Right.
I think what you see happen today was the fact that safety was put right up front. It might last just the pause for a few days and go back in, but at least the system worked. People were watching this very carefully, and they saw something that was suspicious, that might mean something, and they said, okay, let's wait a minute and take a really careful look at this. So I think it fortifies the whole concept that we take safety very seriously.
Yeah, he is not the best communicator. He's not terrible, but he's definitely not the best. I mean, Aaron Carroll is far better than Anthony Fauci is at talking about such things. And so are a lot of other public health experts. And maybe they should be put out front more. But, at the same time, the guy obviously knows what he's talking about. He's certainly not perfect. I think he's made plenty of mistakes. But his credibility is pretty good. So that's why they continue to put him out there, obviously. That all being said, he's basically, saying, in case you didn't understand that, it took me twice to figure out what he meant. What the point he was saying is that people are going to trust the government more, that people are going to trust the CDC more if they recall things as they did with the shots that had been corrupted somehow. Was it the Johnson & Johnson or was it Pfizer? I forget. As they are doing now with the Johnson & Johnson, that they're pulling it off the shelf because they've got some concerns. And so that's supposed to make you feel better. Just the same way if your automobile manufacturer recalled your Honda because your spoiler on your Honda Civic is making it fly up in the air. Who are these people with spoilers? Big giant wings on the back of their Toyotas and Hondas. Find them, send them to me, and let me ask them a series of conversational questions for the podcast. Anyway, that's what Fauci is trying to say. You're gonna feel better about your drugs or your car manufacturer or even your media outlet if they correct where they're wrong, if they do the right thing and recall the lettuce when it's got poop on it or whatever corrupts the lettuce and gives it that listeria. Always sad when the spinach is bad for you. So here is Joe Biden on this issue as well, trying to bring comfort to the American public that don't worry, we've got enough vaccines, even with the Johnson & Johnson on the bench. And then he, like every other American, tried to remember all these different vaccine names, and he's doing a good job. Cut him some slack. The dude's almost 100.
I made sure we have 600 million doses of the mRNA, not of either Johnson & Johnson and or AstraZeneca. So there's enough vaccine that is basically 100% unquestionable for every single solitary American.
Okay, I feel bad now for making fun of his age. Joe Biden is 78 years old. His birthday is November 20th, 1942. All right. So that was the big story. I've got one more expert to play for you from Joy Reid's show, The Readout, last night. Here is the very beautiful in the face Dr. Vin Gupta saying that the blood clots from the vaccine, J&J vaccine, are exceptionally rare. God, this man is pretty.
Good evening, Joy. Good to see you. So the clot that we're worried about, it's called a cerebral venous sinus thrombosis, technical terminology, but it's basically a blood clot in your brain. And in the 6 individuals that received it, 1 passed away. The incidence rate, as you mentioned, Joy, is extremely rare, about 1 in 1 million. Just to give some context, this event, let's say we're not in a pandemic, we're not talking about vaccines, happens in about 3 to 4 cases per every 1 million individuals at baseline. So this is exceptionally rare, lower than the background rate. For those of you who've received the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, particularly women between the ages of 20 and 50, that there seems like there's this predilection for this to happen in that cohort, again, vaccine or not. If you have a severe headache, if you've had blurry vision, if you've lost, say, control of a limb, for example, really just a sort of symptoms out of nowhere, that's when you want to present your clinical provider. Those are extreme symptoms associated with this clotjoy, and that's what should really tip us off. As to how concerned we should be, the pause is necessary, in part because of what Dr. Fauci said. It's to alert folks like myself and my colleagues that this is happening extremely rarely, but that this needs to be treated differently than the way you would typically treat a blood clot. Typically, you get a blood thinner. In this case, you actually get a very different type of therapy. So this serves many purposes.
All right. So there's 4 sound bites on what I think is the biggest story yesterday about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And hopefully you're getting the right information, or you're feeling like you're getting accurate information. I certainly want to present you with the most accurate information I can find on any of the issues that we talk about here on Stand Up. And we do that today with 2 guests, especially Dr. Jen Ditrapani. I'm only saying that. Doesn't mean to throw Michael Cohen under the bus, but we're talking more about politics, which is opinion. I'm blabbering. Okay, so the next issue I wanted to play for you soundbite is from Joe Biden. Yesterday I was walking Indy, my dog, and I listened to this. I was looking at Twitter and I saw this clip, and so I listened to it on my AirPods, which really are, I gotta say, one of the best things in my life. I'm a late adapter to the wireless headphones, but I really like them, and I've only lost them and put them through the wash once. Anyway, Joe Biden yesterday at the memorial for this Capitol Hill officer, he was at his best. I mean, the consoler in chief is what we have missed, obviously, for the last 4 years, not having a president who cares about anybody at all, much less, a Capitol police officer. And Joe Biden was excellent yesterday at this memorial at the Capitol. Even Fox News' Harris Faulkner said that his speech was iconic for honoring the slain officer, Billy Evans. If you saw any of this yesterday, I'm sure you were moved. But I thought this was great. I think this is Joe Biden at his best.
My prayer for all of you is that the day will come when you have that memory. And I said, just smile before you bring a tear to your eyes. I promise you it's going to come. It just takes a while. It takes a while. But when it comes, you'll know, because he's still with you. He's still in your heart. Losing a son, daughter, brother, sister, mom, dad, it's like losing a piece of your soul. But it's buried deep, but it comes back. There's a great quote by R.G. Ingersoll. It was read when my son, who was the chief law enforcement officer in the state of Delaware, the Attorney General, came back from Iraq after a year and he died. And they read this poem from R.G. Ingersoll, who said, "When will defies fear, when duty throws the gauntlet down to fate, when honor scorns compromise with death, this is heroism. Your son, your husband, your brother, your dad was a hero. And he's part of you. It's in your blood. My prayer for you is that moment of the smile comes before the tear, quicker than longer." Thank you.
I also really like the way, that was just a soundbite, but I also really like the way that he started that speech to Billy Evans' family, who was there, his widow and his wife, and rather his widow, his son, and his daughter. His widow and his wife. That would be really awkward. So I was thinking about this as I was listening to that and walking the dog. You would never wish that kind of loss on anybody, but when you do have horrific loss like that, certainly in a violent tragedy like that as well, what does that do in terms of allow you to understand other people's pain? The point I'm trying to make is when you have the leader of the United States or of an organization of any sort, and someone who they oversee, they're in charge of, suffers loss, and that leader has suffered loss, is what I meant to say. There's this empathy, there's this connection, and it matters. It matters so, so much, I think. Certainly it resonates with me, and I appreciate that Joe Biden is able to console people who have suffered, because he has suffered. That was really the point I was trying to make. Okay, so Jon Stewart was in Washington, D.C. in the last 24 hours yesterday, and he was advocating for military veterans who suffer from all types of diseases stemming from the exposure of burn pits, who've been denied government benefits. Now, I do want to say something self-serving right now, because I do want you to support this podcast with a paid subscription. And I think that my credibility matters a lot. Who am I talking to? What kind of interviews am I doing? What kind of work am I putting out on this daily podcast? What is my credibility? Well, here's an example of it. I've been covering burn pits since 2008, and I have the receipts, the emails to prove it. I've been talking about this issue since I first heard of it, since it was first reported by journalists and veterans and their families, that obviously there's going to be some pretty disgusting, gross things happen in your body if you're breathing day in and day out, hour after hour, much less stirring that stew of human waste and jet fuel and weapons and munitions and everything else. That's what they did in Iraq and Afghanistan, and I've been talking about it, and I've been talking about so many of these issues that folks come to much later, and that's one of the reasons why I hope that you'll consider supporting me and my work here with a paid subscription. Patreon.com/Pete Dominick. I don't mean to tout my work on the back of this story, burn pits. That seems pretty ugly. But I got to do it somehow, some way, and every once in a while I got to toss that in there, because this is an issue that I've been talking about, that I care about since 2008, when I first heard about it and started working later, a couple years later, with Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans America, who were on top of this. Okay, so Jon Stewart goes to Washington, and here he is talking about the issue at the press conference they held yesterday.
Doing here today, we're trying to demonstrate that there is an urgent issue in terms of veterans' care that needs to be addressed through congressional action. If you come home from war and you have a physical wound and you end up at Walter Reed Bethesda, right? You'll get world-class care in terms of adaptive rehabilitation and prosthetics. Unfortunately, Walter Reed Bethesda is world-class in dealing with injuries of war because they've had to deal with them so often. But if you have a toxic wound, and I'm telling you, the toxic wounds are as real as any physical wound that you would get from war, they don't know what to do with you. And you spend your time when you come back home basically as a defendant in a trial for your own health care and your health. Forget about, we can get into an argument in this country, man. Nobody should be in a position where their health comes into play when it's their decision at whether they can keep their house or have a car or any of the things that, unfortunately, people have to go through in this country. But damn, for those that have fought and defended and served this country, for them to come home and have to fight against the very government that they volunteered to defend is immoral. It's unconscionable, and it's easily remedied. And they don't need to be put through another bureaucratic process and another clerical process. They don't need another study to determine whether or not it might not be that healthy to burn everything in sight 24 hours a day, 7 days a week next to where you're sleeping. We know it because you're not allowed to do it in the United States of America.
There you go. And very important. The work that Jon Stewart has been doing for years, advocating for people who often he disagrees with their mission as well. I have a lot of respect for speaking clearly on my podcast. I really like Jon, and he was always good to me. He hired me at the Daily Show, and I always had a lot of respect for him, bringing attention to these causes with his celebrity and doing it in the way that he does it is so important. And these families deeply care about that. It matters. And he's a great messenger. So great job, John. And let's stay on that. I'll be talking with Paul Rykoff about it very soon. And speaking of Afghanistan, huge news yesterday from the Biden administration that as of September 11th, 2021, the United States of America will no longer have troops in Afghanistan. I mean, I might not be technically right, and maybe they won't make that actually date, but the headlines are Biden will withdraw all U.S. forces from Afghanistan by September 11th, 2021. And he is expected to make a major announcement on that today. But here is the Senate Minority Leader, Mitch McConnell, talking about it yesterday on the Senate floor. I don't think that we should pull out of Afghanistan because we need to stay in Afghanistan because there could be some bad people in Afghanistan. We got to stay to keep Americans safe. And just moments ago, new reporting suggests the Biden administration plans to turn tail and abandon the fight in Afghanistan. Precipitously withdrawing U.S. forces from Afghanistan is a grave mistake. It is a retreat in the face of an enemy that has not yet been vanquished, an abdication of American leadership. Leaders in both parties, including me, offered criticism when the prior administration floated the concept of a reckless withdrawal from Syria and Afghanistan. Those same voices in both parties should be equally concerned about the Biden administration's announcement today. Whatever. You have no understanding or interest in foreign policy or war, it would seem. Mitch McConnell. Ugh. That's another issue I've covered a lot, of course. The Afghan war, talked to literally hundreds of experts on it. So I'll be following that news closely. This is a major, major development in America's longest war of all time. All right, so obviously a lot of conversation about policing in America, an important conversation that needs to be had. Yesterday, the Congresswoman from Detroit, Rashida Tlaib, drew a lot of criticism and I guess some praise after very controversial remarks about abolishing police and incarceration in the wake of these most recent shootings, high-profile shootings, and obviously the Derek Chauvin case. My friend Dr. Jason Johnson was on MSNBC talking about this, and I beg you to hear him out because it's certainly a conversation that I want to have. Some have asked me where he has been on the show. He's contractually, he can't do podcasts because he's hosting his own podcast now on Slate. He is an MSNBC contributor, and he's got other gigs as well, of course. He's a professor at Morgan State University. But anyway, that's why he hasn't been on the podcast. But I do love to play clips from him in this very provocative answer to a question about policing in America. And I know people get pretty fired up about talk like this, but you got to hear them out.
I've been saying we need to abolish American policing as it currently exists. It doesn't work. And we don't seem to have this sort of difficulty when we're talking about any other government agency. So, Nicole, I teach my class of Morgan State students before this. We were having this discussion with a bunch of 19 and 20-year-olds. And I pointed out to them, I said, what's the graduation rate for high school kids in Baltimore? And the Baltimore graduation rate is only about 80%. And people are always screaming, oh, my gosh, Baltimore public schools are terrible. They need to be taken over by the state. They need to be taken over by the government. Only 80% of these kids graduate. You know the average homicides that are actually solved by police departments? Only about 35%. You know the number of rapes and sexual assaults that are solved by police departments? Less than 60%. You know the percentage likelihood of being shot unarmed as a black person is like 5 times as likely than a white person. Policing doesn't work the way we're doing it right now. And if we had that level of endemic failure in any other government agency, every politician in America would say, not just reimagine, we need to tear this down to the studs and rebuild it. And anything less than that is absolute gaslighting to the tears that this woman was expressing. I am tired of people saying this is a tragedy. We've known it was a tragedy, and no one's doing anything about it. And whether it's a mass shooting in a public school or another black man or another black woman, and I promise you, Nicole, because before this trial is over, I said this when the Derek Chauvin trial began. I was like, we're going to have another shooting before this trial is over. And we have one. If the trial goes another 2 weeks, we'll have another shooting. So we need to start thinking of a different way to approach policing. And if we don't have that conversation, then no one cares about crying tears and no one cares about blood in the streets, because anything else is just window dressing.
All right. Good stuff. Let's talk about policing. Let's have a thoughtful conversation about policing and what is effective to change people's behaviors, prevent them from committing crimes, rehabilitate them. Talk about the entire criminal justice system in the United States of America from any angle you want, and there are plenty. I've been talking to public defenders a lot over the year of this podcast, and police as well. And so I'm welcoming everybody into that conversation anytime. Who should I talk to next? You tell me. standupwithpete@gmail.com. All right, and this final clip I've got for you here is from yesterday's White House press briefing, where Jen Psaki continues to impress. I'm not sure who this reporter's name is, but I could tell he was afraid. You could tell, you can hear the fear in his voice as he realizes the question that he's asking is not going the way that he wants it to. It's a question about tax policy, and I think I don't need to set it up more than that, but listen to this exchange from yesterday.
But even though, utility companies did, maybe it was arguably partially for show, but they did announce, rate decreases after the 27 tax law passed and attributed it to the tax law passing.
Is there some data that you're expecting from economists suggesting that will be the case, or are you just getting ahead of what might happen when the bill passes?
I'm just getting ahead of that. There were those announcements. You said they didn't have the intended effects, but utility companies did say, hey, we can pass on this lower rate to consumers through their utility bills.
And have utility companies said, I have not seen it if they have, that they would raise the cost if this bill passed to invest in infrastructure and get lead out of the pipes to make sure there's clean drinking water and create millions of jobs?
I'm not aware of any specific announcements like that, but I'm just saying that was one of the results that occurred after the 2017.
Well, then I don't think we have to anticipate it as an issue quite yet. Go ahead, Hans.
Ooh, go ahead, Hans. Who is next for Jen Psaki? She's doing a great job. She's, the president of the United States spokesperson, propagandist in chief, really. And I don't want to get too crazy with the praise because of what that job requires, but I think she is doing it as well as anybody has that I've ever seen. All right, that's what I called the last 24, and now it's rapid-fire news headlines that aren't politics, that aren't COVID, but are important. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for your news dump. Take it away, listener Pete Coe.
Wealthy CEO lets his dog take a dump. He's out on Pete's front lawn for today's news dump.
You rhyme dump with dump. I love you, buddy. All right. Let's start in San Diego, where a very rare thing happened, but a zoo employee was hospitalized after being bitten by a venomous snake. She was not... I'm going to keep that in there. I'm not editing it out. A venomous snake bit her, and there's no anti-venom for a snake bite. And so the zoo says that the worker was bitten by an African bush viper. Doesn't sound like a snake. An area of the zoo that is off limits to the public. So, USA Today reporting that the bush viper's venom can cause hemorrhaging and potentially death. There's no known anti-venom for its bite, though people, including a Texas man bitten by a bush viper he illegally kept as a pet, have been treated with an anti-venom developed for the venom of other snakes. I hope that this zoo employee is okay. Now let's head to California, where they are very concerned about the wildfire season. Historic droughts have taken over in the West. I got to probably talk more about that. I read that headline the other day. California racing to spend more than $500 million before this year's wildfire season gets going in earnest. In normal years, ABC News reports the worst of the fires don't start until late summer or fall, leaving a window through May to thin forests, clear buffer zones designed to slow the spread of fires near communities and beef up the state's seasonal fire crews. Not this year, though. The dry winter is already blending into a tinder dry summer that has produced twice as many wildfires as this time last year, according to the governor. Be careful out there, everybody. Thinking of you, Ronnie, and everybody in California. A 5.2 earthquake rattled the Greek Aegean Sea Islands. A moderately strong earthquake has struck between the southeastern Aegean, am I saying that right, islands? I'm not going to pronounce these words, but I just always like to mention when there's an earthquake over 5.1. Is that my threshold? The Pope is asking U.S. bishops to resign after a cover-up of an investigation of Roman Catholic diocese in Minnesota. It says Pope Francis asked its bishop to resign after I can't speak tonight, after he was investigated by the Vatican for allegedly interfering with past investigations into the clergy sexual abuse. How about that from the Associated Press? It's everywhere. They're everywhere. It's endemic that, I'm sorry, the institution is corrupt in the worst possible ways. Sorry, Catholics. And by the way, that was the Minnesota Archdiocese. And when Minnesota was actually asked for comment on how it feels about all these bad things and bad press it's getting, Minnesota responded with, Jesus Christ, this week is awful. I swear there's a lot of really good people and good things infinitely always happening here in Minnesota. Come see us. Man, Minnesota doesn't even sound like it's from Minnesota. U.S. investigating possible airbag failures. Hey, I mentioned that earlier as a possible example, and here it shows up in the news dump that this is how you gain trust and credibility. Apparently, the U.S. government's Highway Safety Agency is investigating complaints that airbags may not inflate and crash in a crash on thousands of GM vehicles. Nearly 750,000 Chevy, Cadillac, GMC vehicles from 2020 and 2021 model years. Most are full-size pickup trucks and SUVs, so get your truck or SUV checked if it's any of those brands. Mick Jagger and Dave Grohl have teamed up for a song about the pandemic called Easy Sleazy. I listened to it, and I'll play it for you at the end for the show enders. How about that? After John sings us out with Stand Up. West Virginia is apparently going to pay remote workers $12,000 to move there. West Virginia's governor says it's a chance to live in, quote, paradise. Really? Paradise? West Virginia? And there's some beautiful places for sure, especially near all the mountains tops that they cut off. But paradise? Anyway, that's pretty cool. And finally, the rankings for best countries are out after several years at number 2 and one at number 3 since the inception of the best countries report from U.S. News and World Report. Canada has finally climbed to the number 1 spot. Yay, Canada! A lot of Canadians listen to this podcast. Congratulations, everybody. In the 6th edition of the U.S. News and World Report's annual rankings released on Tuesday. All right, number 10, top 10 countries in the world. Number 10, Netherlands. Number 9, Sweden. Number 8, United Kingdom. Number 7, New Zealand. Number 6, United States. 5, Australia. 4, Switzerland. 3, Germany. Number 2 is Japan. And the number 1 best place to live in both quality of life and social purpose is Canada. Wow, that's exciting. That's very cool. I'd love to live in Canada for half the year at least. Okay, that's it for the news dump, and now it's time to get to my first guest. She is a longtime listener, a supporter, a subscriber, a member of our community. I'm very happy to have her on the podcast. I think I had her on once before early on, but had a whole bunch of questions since it was National Pet Day. I've been thinking a lot about animals and certainly my dog and having conversations about him and wanting to have different types of conversations on this podcast than just the everyday news issues that matter so much and big problems that we deal with. But everybody loves pets, and most of you have a pet, and I had a lot of questions for Dr. Jen Ditrapani. Really excited to have such a cool person in our community, and she is, along with her husband, they own 3 animal hospitals down in Florida: Ocean Breeze Animal Hospital, Hobie Sound Veterinary Clinic, as well as the Morningside Animal Hospital. Do I have it all right, Jen? We just had an awesome conversation. We talked about a whole bunch of issues, and I'm not even done. I have so many more. If you have questions for Jen, you can reach out to her if you're a member of the community, and otherwise, if you do, send them my way. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope to have a lot more. If you're a smart listener who wants to join me, reach out. Send me an email. Send me a pitch. standupwithpete@gmail.com. Let's go right now with Dr. Jennifer Ditrapani. We were talking the other night at the Zoom, whatever I had asked you, and I was like, man, I have a billion questions for you. So Thank you for allowing me to fire all kinds of questions at you about veterinarians and animals and whatever.
You're welcome.
Also, I know you're super cool, and so like anytime I step in shit, you're gonna either hold my hand or tell me I'm an ignorant prick. So, here we go with that.
I'll try.
Are we ready?
Okay.
All right. So you and your husband are both veterinarians, and you have 3 different animal hospitals.
We do. We have 3 different animal hospitals. We own all 3, and we're really busy, needless to say. Yeah.
What's the difference between an animal hospital and a veterinarian's office? Are those 2 different things?
I would say they're interchangeable. Maybe in the past, it used to be a clinic, was sort of more of a walk-in clinic, or you just get vaccinations, whereas a hospital might be like, a specialty, that type of thing. I think they're kind of interchangeable now. You could have an animal hospital, an animal clinic. I know there's one around that's called Veterinary Medical Center. Just different names, I'm going to say, for the same thing for the most part in small animal general practice.
Do veterinarians make a lot of money? Does it depend where you work, what kind of state? I mean, how does it compare to other type of physicians, people who work in medicine? And then do veterinarians make a lot of money? Is there like specialties where you would, focus on, or is it have a lot to do with, in your guys' case, the fact that you own basically 3 different locations, and so that's going to be more lucrative than just being a veterinarian working for somebody else at one location? I know those are a lot of questions, but in general, like, what are we talking about? Do you do it to get rich?
No, you don't. I don't know of one person who's gotten into it and said, I'm going to do this because I'm going to make a ton of money. You come out with a lot of student debt, and you are paying off your student debt for a long time. Most people.
Is it compared to med school? Like, I don't even know how much medical school, but is it like comparable?
I don't know how much med school is. I will tell you, we came out each with about $200,000 in debt. And that's without a lot of undergrad loans. I had a few undergrad loans. Mostly I got through with being a Florida resident and getting a sort of less expensive education. But we went to a more expensive vet school. And so, yeah, our loans are about $250,000, I'm going to say, $250,000 each. So I don't know how much med school is, but you have to find a job that you can pay back your loans. That's a big part of it. There are differences in the salaries. So somebody who works in small animal versus large animal, a big hospital versus, your own little small hospital. And you're right too, ownership versus being an associate. There are different benefits, I would say, to it. I mean, maybe you're looking at, in a rural location, possibly 70 to 80,000, maybe starting. And then up to owners of multiple practices. Like, we know somebody who owns 10 practices in the Midwest. They're doing well, but that's not the majority.
But that's about business. But that makes, like, it's a fair, I mean, that I could kind of imagine understanding business ownership versus working for somebody else's business. How many years of school? What's the education? And is it the same for most vets? Is it similar standard?
It is the same. Yeah, it is, because there are standards you have to meet in order to get licensed. So you get you don't have to have a bachelor's. You have to fulfill certain requirements to apply to vet school and then get into vet school. So you could even do 3 years of undergrad, not get your bachelor's, and possibly get into vet school. I've known some people who have done that. You could get a master's and then apply for vet school as long as you meet the requirements, the testing. And then vet school itself is about 4 years for just to get your DVM. If you want to be a surgeon, a nutritionist, a internal medicine, you have another few years after that. But you can come out right out of school and do whatever you want for the most part.
So how long have you been a veterinarian?
So we graduated in 2004. Prior to that, I think I started working with animals in 96, 97. But yeah, we graduated in 04. So we're, kind of old and getting there. Experienced. We're very seasoned and experienced.
Yeah, I'm sure. How often do you and your husband, who's a better veterinarian?
That wasn't a fair question. I mean, I'm going to say me. but that's because I'm me. And,
do
do
you guys argue about anything within, like, procedurally, or even, like, are there different schools of thought between you and your husband, or really you and other veterinarians that come up? That would be interesting.
So we don't argue. There's a certain sort of, I guess you could say, set of standards, medical standards that everyone pretty much knows that you're supposed to meet. I mean, it's sort of like in human medicine, you treat something some way, there's some leeway. You could choose a different antibiotic or something like that. But for the most part, you're going to treat things, the way that you were taught or your further education tells you, with some variation, So pretty much there are some studies that come out. You'll find theories about studies related to when to spay or neuter. That's a big new topic right now is, when's the best time to spay or neuter. So you might have disagreements about that. But if your practice philosophy is pretty standard, it's pretty standard across the board.
Where are you guys on circumcision? Sorry. I'm sorry. I just thought of that because I was like, I was trying to think of a controversial thing. I'm going to keep making jokes like that. Like whether or not you should spay or neuter when. And it's like, I'm trying to think of an equivalent human thing.
Circumcised or not. Luckily, we haven't had to make that choice since we have 3 daughters. So I have never had to make that decision personally. I
don't even think about it because, I have 2 daughters too. But I guess it is,
right.
I guess continues to be a controversial thing. No, I'm sorry I brought it up because I don't want to derail this.
Well, maybe vaccines, vaccines are obviously in the news right now. And I would say that, not between veterinarians necessarily, but with the clients, do I vaccinate, my pet for these diseases? What about rabies? So we're answering those questions all the time.
Do people not want to vaccinate their animals often?
Yeah, it's not often, but I have had people say that they do not want to vaccinate, for instance, for rabies. And, with that, you're dealing with the law.
What are the laws around vaccinating? I think I'm going to go ahead without ever thinking about saying that there should be a law that you have to vaccinate your dog against rabies so it doesn't get rabies and then bite my kid or me.
It's going to be, I believe it's county to county, but generally, yes, in the U.S. and other countries, it is the law to vaccinate domestic animals.
If an animal if my dog got rabies, is there anything that can be done?
If an animal's not vaccinated and gets rabies, it will be fatal. They will die. Oh,
it'll kill the dog. I just assumed that you had to put an animal down when it got rabies because they're monsters.
Well, yes, there are.
You wouldn't want to put it down because it's your dog. But you're saying, I mean, the bottom line is they're not going to get rabies. They're mostly vaccinated. But if they did get rabies, I would think you'd have to euthanize them because they are bad now. It's not.
There are even laws related to that. So we actually have to contact animal control, and you do have a certain protocol of observation, and then there's some different testing rules that you have. Yeah, it's not fun. Just vaccinate your pets for rabies.
Okay. Yeah. Vaccinate your pets for rabies and other things too, right? There are other vaccinated, like heartworm or something.
There are.
Or is that?
So heartworm, there's a lot of heartworm in Florida. So we're always talking about heartworm. So some of the things we do, I mean, we're educating the public on, zoonotic disease, which is disease from animals to humans. We're educating them on diseases that animals can get. You probably have Lyme where you live.
Yep.
So I would recommend that, your dog gets vaccinated for Lyme. There's other diseases out there, lepto and distemper. Yeah, we would recommend that. But we also tailor it towards the individual pet. So I do not vaccinate my dog for Lyme because she doesn't have exposure. So we talk about that a lot to people.
Wow, a thing Florida doesn't have.
Kind of.
I mean,
you sort of do.
Environmentally, I mean, your state, we could probably go off on a tangent here, but Florida is environmentally in all kinds of really serious problems as a result of, the agricultural industry, where it is in the country, the Gulf.
Yes.
Yes. So
it really is. And we had an algae. I don't know if you remember, it was a couple of years ago. We had an algae bloom issue. I'm not fully 100%. I think it had to do with the Okeechobee runoffs and Lake Okeechobee and all of that. But we had an algae issue where our waterways were shut down. We did have some animals that were going swimming and were getting sick. And we had just a couple in our area, but really bad illnesses. So there's environmental, yeah.
What are the controversies that you think would be interesting to talk about in terms of the most typical things like purebreds and certain species? I think this is what came up in the Zoom chat the other night. Like, there are certain animals that shouldn't be bred, that shouldn't be alive. I don't know what I'm talking about or how I'm saying these things, but these are obviously controversies that are pretty common. They come up a lot, but we like and I know that you're really very open-minded and sensitive about this, while you probably have your own personal opinion and your own professional opinion. It is got to be tough when someone comes in with a certain type of breed that you think morally shouldn't even, am I going to say exist? Is that wrong?
I do not have incredibly strong feelings about that. I know some people do. When you start talking about dogs like French Bulldogs and Bulldogs, those are probably some of the more controversial ones because they need a lot of intervention. They have a lot of breathing problems, but the people love them, and they're great dogs. They are great. You just have to be ready for potential surgeries, health issues down the road. So you just have to choose, a breed that you think suits you. You wouldn't get a Great Dane in an apartment. Well, maybe that's not, Great Danes are kind of couch potatoes. You wouldn't get a Greyhound, I'll say, in an apartment. And if you're not ready, I would say financially for something like a French Bulldog, probably you should think about something else.
I hear what you're saying, and I think I would agree with you in terms of, like, it sounds like what you're saying is, I'm so happy that you have an animal that you love. I'm not going to judge what kind of animal or what you did to it. Is that right? You're just happy people are happy with their animals?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. And if they're responsible enough to take care of it. We get breeders every so often that maybe aren't doing responsible things, but you can't control that. People, all kinds of controversial things, ear cropping, tail docking, stuff like that.
I don't know what either of those are.
Yeah, so ear crops and tail docks have been
I know that's the name of a band I like, Ear Crops and Tail Docks, but I don't know. I never asked what it was.
So they've actually been banned in Europe, I would say, for several years. I'm not sure the exact time. So, when a Doberman or a boxer gets their ears cut, so instead of being floppy, they're standing, they're cut to be that way.
Why?
Historical breed standard. You can, the different breeds have different reasons why. Historically, I'm going to say, without looking it up, fighting may be part of it. You have less.
But now, why would a person do that now? Only for aesthetics? They like the way it looks?
Yeah.
Oof.
I mean, you're going to have people every so often that are actually fighting dogs. That's not luckily very common. I mean, you remember years ago with
Michael Vick.
Pit bulls and people would do that a lot. We're more seeing it for just aesthetics, just because people like how it looks. But I think that is changing, and you might see that boxers where you would cut their tail, it'd be this short. You're seeing boxers now with their tails. So I can't
believe how much I didn't even know. Like, I wasn't even curious about that my entire life. I did not think I knew that was a thing.
You've seen boxers.
Yeah, I've seen them. Now I know what you're talking about, but I'm like, I never knew that. A lot of people, most people probably did. I feel like an idiot, but wow, people.
And when you're talking about circumcision, when we do their tails, this is my analogy to circumcision.
Yeah.
When we do their tails, they're about 3 days old. We don't do them past 4 days. So,
why do people do that? Why do people do their tails? And do you do that?
Selectively. I don't do ears. Most vets will do tails as long as they're tiny babies. We try to put a little lidocaine on them, like a baby boy. Is it right? Or is it painful? Possibly. Do they remember it?
Yeah. I listen, you know what? I rarely get on a high horse about animals. Like as you know, I have a horse for everything else, but like I feel like I can't get too much on a high horse about animals as long as I'm eating them. It feels really hypocritical to be like, you shouldn't cut your dog, do whatever with your pet. Meanwhile, I'm eating chickens a lot of chickens.
That's an interesting controversy too, because then you think, pigs, for instance, are really smart. And do they feel the same things that dogs feel? Why would we eat a pig?
I think that's actually I'm not joking when I say I think the major difference is it sounds funny. Pigs are delicious and dogs are not. Like, wouldn't people eat the animals that we've become used to having as our pets if they were good eating? Wouldn't they?
I don't even know. I hate to even think about. I mean, there are these horrible things. I'm sure you've seen them around the world where people do eat dogs, but then if you have a pet cow, who's to say that you shouldn't eat a cow? I mean, I over the years have become personally selective in the meat that I eat. I will not eat veal. I don't eat pork anymore, even though, like you said, it's absolutely delicious.
Mm-hmm.
Just out of some, ethical considerations for how they're housed, we do try to get, I try to buy, cage-free or local eggs. That's one thing that if you start looking into it, the chickens are treated just absolutely terribly, How much do the chickens realize they're being treated terribly? I don't know, but I think that's up for debate.
I don't care as much about chickens as I do about cows, and I don't care as much about pigs as I do about dogs. And yet I have no moral standing on it. I have no way to defend against any of it, but I'm being honest when I'm like, I think I even made a joke in my stand-up act about whether or not I think certain animals are cute. Like, I eat chickens because they're ugly, and it's so a lot of people hate that, especially those who have chickens.
A lot of vegans and vegetarians that are going to.
And they're right, and I'm wrong. It's so stupid, but I don't know. I guess that's my stupid brain thinks that way. But what about getting back to your practice and the kind of the questions and moral quandaries that I think people have? First of all, what percentage in your 3 animal hospitals of pets are dogs, cats, and then everything else? I'm going to guess that it's mostly dogs and cats. I think you might have even told me before, and then everything else. But what are the kind of percentages if you had to ballpark it, or do you know?
Our practice, I'm going to say, is probably 70% dogs, maybe 25% cats, and then maybe 5% other, maybe even less. I mean, I think we talked about the other night, I think I saw a ferret and a guinea pig. And I think we saw a rabbit the other day, and it's like every couple of weeks we see. But we're not that kind of practice either. We have people who if there's not an exotics practice in the area, they're going to call and say, hey, I have a bearded dragon. Will you see it? I've seen a skunk and a prairie dog and a fox, because people have them as pets, but we're not wildlife. So when you get into vet medicine, you have to sort of decide, am I going to try to work in a zoo? Am I going to work with dogs and cats? My intention originally was to work with horses and dogs and cats, which is called mixed animal practice. So you'll see a lot of rural vets that will do everything. So they're going out to someone's home and they're seeing their cat and their dog and their cow and their goat and their this and that. Versus, in a city or a suburban area, you're going to have your clinic that's specializing. So you've got your even cat practices. So some people listening might take their cat to a cat-only, feline-only practice. Huh. Benefit to that is that cats don't like smelling dogs and other things, so you bring your cat to a cat-only.
You're saying that when cats come into you, because there's all these other animals, they can tell, and that's it. Then is somehow challenging, difficult, or uncomfortable.
It could be. We keep a room specific for cats, and we try to keep cats and dogs away from each other. So if you think about a cat who's already freaked out, owner grabs it, shoves it in carrier, takes it for a ride, we take it, and then it's in a completely unfamiliar place, and then there's a dog barking, or it smells like a dog that was just in there, it's going to stress them out more, and we're not going to be able to do what we need to do. So we do keep a room separate for cats. So like a feline-only practice, only cats. Then you've got your equine-only practices, where you're just doing horses. That's what I started out doing. And then you've got, your big referral places. There's a big equine practice down in Palm Beach, Wellington, because that's where everybody from up north takes their horses. They travel with their horses. So you've got all these, crazy expensive, awesome horses down south. And then up in New York City, you've got AMC, which is a big small animal hospital, animal medical center in Manhattan. It's huge. So, yeah.
Have you, I don't know if you can recall your husband's experience, but what is your worst injury from an animal? Have you been attacked, been bitten, been whatever else? And what about your husband?
So,
and is there something that commonly happens?
Bites.
From
so dog bites, cat bites, scratches. I'm going to say bites and scratches are probably the most common in our field. Neither of us, luckily, have had any major issue. We have not had to have. I stitched him up one time. That was a good story.
From what?
Yeah, I think he got a bite. And he was like, I don't want to go to the doctor. Would you stitch me up? And he almost passed out. It was actually...
Really? What, did you numb it?
I think I did.
You don't remember if you numbed your husband before you stitched him up?
I don't remember. That might have been a payback for something. I have to ask him. Did I numb you before I stitched you? We have not had any major injuries.
What other injuries could there be or would you hear other than a bite or a scratch? I'm not even creative enough.
Well, I mean, small animal, yeah, bite, scratches. I mean, there are other things like, needle sticks, if you're trying to use a needle or a scalpel and you hit yourself instead or something.
Got it.
We use a laser. So, that's just more like human error. Animal, though, I'm going to say dogs and cats, bites and scratches, which can be really bad. Sometimes we've had a few really bad ones in our staff. Horses, of course, kicks, bites. Horses bite. It hurts a lot.
I've spent a lot of time with the horse. Not a lot of time, but enough time that, but I've never gotten... I don't stand behind him. I always knew not to stand behind a horse, but I've never been bitten by one. How much, what percentage of the time are you performing surgery of your day? Or do you only do it on certain days, certain hours, or what? And what is the rest of your practice like?
My particular day in our practices, we schedule like 1 or 2 days a week for surgery, maybe 3. Each doctor pretty much has 1 day a week where they do surgery, and then the rest of the time's appointments. So you're doing ears, skin. Florida has so many allergies. We see allergic dogs most of our day. Some days it's just.
I don't even know what you're talking about or how you would treat allergies in an animal.
Luckily we have a lot of really good medications for allergies. We have some testing, ear issues, skin issues, hair loss. We do a lot of wellness prevention. So we're doing blood testing. Surgeries, and it depends what you want to do. You can go to extra school and be a surgeon. You can be an orthopedic surgeon. If we ever have a case that's really tough that we aren't trained to do, we'll send them. We have an ophthalmologist close by. She'll do eye surgery. But we do a good variety of surgeries.
Is it mostly routine, or do you do today's surgery is going to be a lot different? And do you ever repair bones, or is that orthopedics only?
I don't repair bones. When you get your DVM, you're licensed to do anything. I could grab a bone instrument and attempt to fix a fracture. Should I? No, because I haven't been trained to do so, but I could. But I would send that to somebody who knows what they're doing. But we'll do, mass removals, dental. We do a lot of dentals.
What would be an example of a dental?
So when their teeth get really a lot of calculus and tartar buildup, does Indy get hers? You got to look up in there. I would tell everybody who has a dog or a cat, if it's safe, don't put your fingers in your cat's mouth if it's not a good cat. And look up at the top of their gums, and if you see brown, they need to get their teeth cleaned.
My dog chatters its jaw all the time.
She probably needs to get her teeth checked.
Oh, yeah. All right. If that's an easy
sign of pain.
Well, the issue that I think most animal owners, pet owners have probably, and it might be the most boring thing to talk about with you, probably the most important though, is cost of care, right? Like I had no idea. Again, I'm new to pet owning, certainly my first dog, but I had no idea there was insurance until the dog had a bladder infection. And so the question about insurance, do you think people should get it? Is it like human health insurance, and is it different state to state? Because I'm sure that you must often deal with, and it's got to be hard, but telling someone, listen, we could save your cat or dog, but it's going to cost you $2,000, $3,000 more, whatever. And then people have a really tough decision to make. So what about insurance, and what about costs, and how often is it that people just can't afford to save their animal's life?
So it is an ongoing issue, I would say. Insurance is different than human insurance. So it's basically you get a plan through whatever company you like. You pay your vet for whatever services, and then insurance reimburses you. So we don't file, we don't do claims or anything like that. So I don't have a team of people who does insurance, which is great.
Yeah. Because then you can spend time practicing medicine.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, there's some debate to be had there, and whether our process is, but I mean, we charge what we charge, and there's no discounted for insurance or copays or any of that. If you have insurance, it's just a whole different thing for dogs and cats. It's definitely recommended. I would have people check it out. We don't endorse anyone over another. But generally, yeah, if you don't have insurance, you just have the what you have to pay. And that's it.
When we talked before, I think we talked about this, but like the hardest thing must be euthanizing someone's pet that is like a family member to them. How often do you have to do that, and how on earth do you deal with that? And the same could be asked, to any physician, but I just feel like veterinarians probably deal with euthanization. Is it that even the right word? A lot of their time versus obviously most human physicians don't. I mean, that's not even a choice, obviously. Yes. But if people die as humans, unfortunately, it's not a choice in my mind. I think morally people should be allowed to end their lives. But yeah. So how much do you deal with that on a daily?
This is an interesting moral conversation as well, and we've had it with some. I've had it with some of my other vets and vet friends, and kind of extending it to how we treat humans, at end of life. And I think that most of us are more on board with allowing someone to make that decision, even for a human, because when you look at suffering that's uncontrollable, we have a way to end it in our field. So, it's, I have to say, yes, it's hard, but when I look at what I do in a day or in a week or in a month, those are the times that I remember, is if I'm with someone and I'm counseling them on that end of life process. And, I feel like purpose-wise for me, to be honest, those are the times that I feel like I'm doing the most for someone. So I could hug a puppy and give them their first shots and tell someone what to do with their baby and get kisses. But at that end of life stage, when there's, an animal that I know needs me and the person needs me, that's when I feel like that is so nice to hear. I did not expect that. I was looking at it through my own kind of lens about how I would imagine, but that's really very interesting. I like you that much more now hearing you define that. But at the same time, it must be, I mean, do you have to, I would imagine a lot of veterinarians, I almost want to just, generalize, like they don't love people. That's why they're working with animals. Is there any truth to that? More importantly, the point is, like, you're dealing with someone who's, in your case, I'm sure, I know you well enough to know that you're probably amazing at dealing with these people because you're also great with people. You're a really awesome woman. But like, I bet you some veterinarians aren't really good in that moment that you're talking about, give you so much purpose, because they don't know what, I don't know, maybe you get better at it. Well, it's got to be hard if you don't deal. Yes. I do think it's a skill. I think that it takes a lot of empathy for the human. We all learn how to do the procedure, and you can train somebody to give an animal an injection, but it's almost like the other part of it, I think, is more important. Yeah. I counsel people. I talk to them a lot. I tell them what's going to happen. You know, we talk about it. A lot of my time is spent reassuring them that it's the right decision, because that's the hardest part for someone is they're coming in there and they're saying, am I doing this? Should I be doing this right now? And I tell people, I'm going to be honest with you. And if it's not the right time, I'll tell you it's not the right time. But if it is, we're going to talk about it and we're going to figure it out and we're going to make it the most peaceful process we can. And, you know, yeah, I have had to kind of step in, I'm going to say, on a couple of occasions in a situation where I felt like another vet wasn't handling the situation with the human well. And to me, that's the biggest part of it.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine, again, not knowing anything, that people, because of human nature, we don't want to let any loved one go. But I'll be just really honest, because it's you and I not talking about it, it's selfish. We do it for selfish reasons. We're keeping this animal or person alive. I mean, I know people who've kept their spouses alive forever on life support because they can't. But it's not about you, right? In this case, it's about the patient. And so that's pretty...
It's really interesting that you say that, because that's what I say almost the exact same thing to people. So if they come in and they're unsure, and, you know, I tell them, this is not a selfish decision. This is a decision for your pet. This is not for us, because if it was up to us, we'd keep them around forever. But we can't, and so we have to know when it's time to let go. So I say almost that exact same thing to people. So
what are the things? I have so many questions for you, and I'm almost out of time here, I know. But what are the things that we do as pet owners with good intentions, but really are wrong, that we do a lot? And I'm thinking of just one, like, I have no idea what is good or bad to feed my dog. I know that she'll eat anything from steak to socks, and pretty much will eat anything because she's a dog. I think that's probably true of most dogs. I don't know, but
poop, socks, underwear.
Yeah, they'll eat anything. So what should we? What is something that I'm thinking of? The question is, what do we feed our animals often that's really bad and we have no idea, or is that they can eat anything? I don't know.
My general nutrition public service announcement right now is grain-free is not all it's cracked up to be, and there's no scientific evidence.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're now talking, it sounds like a kind of dog food that gets sold to people?
Grain-free. So there are dog foods, and people who are listening, I'm sure most of them know exactly what I'm talking about, labeled grain-free. I think marketing-wise, and because humans and gluten and grains are bad generally, right, you would say. So then, therefore, that must happen for our dogs too. There actually have been some studies that show that, especially in small dogs, it can cause cardiac issues. So grain-free does not help with allergies. It doesn't help with weight. It doesn't really help with anything. So I go on the, and like most of your listeners too, the side of science and studies, and there really is not a lot of evidence showing that grain-free is helpful. So.
Oh, I wasn't even expecting. I had no idea about that. I feel like such an idiot, but I really don't pay enough attention.
But that's okay. I mean, and a lot of people do, and a lot of people are home cooking for their pets.
A lot of people are home cooking for their pets. I don't even home cook for myself. Wow.
Another thing that is not always the best, because you don't have that exact balance of the calcium and this and that and all the things that go into it. So
maybe in moderation, it don't every once in a while make a meal, but generally you should feed them the food meant for them that was designed for them.
Unless you're really spending a lot of time, or you have a a recipe from a nutritionist, you really should just try to pick a good dog food that it works best for your dog. Yeah.
What about, though, actually, my question was more about, I'm so glad that you answered it the way you did, because I didn't know about that with different kinds of dog food. But I'm thinking about scraps and things that we give.
Oh, yeah.
I'm always on my daughters. I feel like people know not to give them chocolate or onions or something like that. But I also I feel like a lot of times we'll give our dogs anything that's an animal, but not thinking about how much it's been processed or whatever else is in it that might not be good or something.
I would avoid, especially like the meat products, which can cause pancreas problems, especially in a little dog. So you want to avoid like salty lunch meats, really heavy protein, a bunch of meatballs or something like that. Like just like you said, moderation is
I
good.
just gave her a meatball sandwich, and now you tell me that. A bunch of meatballs. No, yeah, okay.
Also, my other PSA is antlers. Antlers are really bad. The like antlers to chew on. People
they sell antlers for your pets, and wow.
Yeah. So what I've seen with antlers is they are fracturing dogs' teeth. They're big molars in the back. They're making a fracture down the side of it because I think they're so hard. So that's my other thing is watch those antlers. They're really can be
okay. All right, I'm going to let you go, but I feel like we have to create a segment for you to take questions from everybody at some point whenever you want. And I also love your PSAs, and we should name them something. We should brand them. Do you have any more off the top of your head that you can share here at the end? Because I can't. I've been thinking about talking to you all morning and last night. I've been asking a lot of my friends, what would you ask a veterinarian? But I feel like I've got so many other questions and things I'm not asking, and you have a lot of information and PSAs. So is there any more that commonly you see like, oh, I wish people knew better about?
The other thing that I was thinking of, and this can go into a discussion for another day, as far as all of the other companies that are kind of coming into the pet space and the veterinary space, including Walmart, Target. And they are getting our pet medications, and, Chewy is taking a chunk out of our pet food sales. I mean, you name it, and you can get a prescription for any of the medications that we sell in our pharmacy. Be careful. There's a couple things. If you're going to get online stuff, you make sure that it's from the US. I've had some people get either counterfeit products within the US, or European products, Australian products that are kilograms and people don't notice. So they're underdosing, overdosing their pets. Generally, though, and again, this is for, maybe next conversation about what's happening economically in our profession. Try to support your local vet. We have pharmacy. We are pharmacists in addition to everything else that we do. We do dispense medications, and it is a part of our overall health for the pets, knowing what they're getting, knowing that it's the correct item. And we all have online pharmacies too. So my recommendation is get your meds from your vet or their online pharmacy. Not that Walmart or Target are doing anything wrong necessarily, but if you shop local, help out your local vet by supporting them, by buying your stuff from them.
Dr. Jennifer Ditrapani. I said it the Sicilian way. 3 locations in Florida for all of our Florida listeners. You guys have to take your pets to Jen and her husband. What's his name?
His name is Nate.
Nate. And I really appreciate you joining me and your support of the show. And I'm so happy to have you in our community. And finally, happy birthday.
Thank you. And I appreciate you. And just if I can say one more little quick thing, unrelated to my profession, I really appreciate you, Pete. And you have become a part of my daily routine. And I've just learned so much. So I just want to say thank you.
I'm super happy to have you a part of this community. I've learned so much from our talks, and I'm so happy and the problem is that I trade on our relationship too much. And I think that you probably deal with that a lot with people. Like, how annoying is it to get texts from friends who are like, listen, we're friends. I don't need to make an appointment. I'm just going to text you. Because I've done that to you, I think only once. And then I slipped one in during our conversation. So I try not to take advantage of it.
You also, like I said, I get knowledge and education on things that I don't know about from you. So it is a two-way street. So I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
All right, isn't she great? Isn't she so cool and smart? And isn't that an awesome thing that she does each and every day along with her husband and her family or kids that live down in Florida? So if you've got pets and you live in Florida, that's where you should take them. Any questions? you want to contact her, reach out to me, standupwithpete@gmail.com. And if you are a smart listener who has something to offer, I would love to hear from you. Send me a pitch. Jen didn't, by the way. I mean, I just reached out to her because I've got to know her, and she's just really accessible and is great to talk to about this stuff. But there's other people I want to reach out to. Certain folks have joined me often on the program that are listeners that are really smart. And so maybe you could let me know. Standupwithpete@gmail.com. How many times have I mentioned my email today? All right, moving on. I am very excited to bring my second guest onto the show. Michael Cohen is a regular here on Stand Up, formerly a longtime columnist at the Boston Globe. He has gone out like so many of the rest of us for any number of different reasons and launched his own thing. He's now on a Substack, and you got to check it out. I'm happy and proud to be a subscriber. I love reading Michael Cohen. I love following him on Twitter at SpeechBoy71. He's great. But his new Substack is truthandcons.substack.com. Find a link to it in the show notes today if you can't remember that and you're out walking your dog or doing whatever you're doing in your car, you don't have anything to write with. Truthandcons.substack.com. Here he is, ladies and gentlemen, the great Michael Cohen. And I'm contractually obligated to say, no, not that one. All right, there he is, one of my favorite people to talk to, especially about politics, but really about anything, including, vaccines, parenting, you name it. Michael Cohen, welcome back, and congratulations on your newsletter, which you've just started, Truth and Consequences. Tell people about it and why they should subscribe first, because I am loving it.
So the URL is truthandcons.substack.com. It is basically 3 or 4 days a week of the, I think, most interesting political commentary on what's happening in politics in America. Just sort of taking a look back at the most important developments, what we should be focused on. Sort of trying to get through sort of the ordinary news coverage to get sort of a little deeper and more nuanced look at what's happening in politics. And I try to eschew the hot takes for more of what I would call maybe more lukewarm takes, occasionally slightly chilly takes. But just, it's a basically, I've been a columnist at the Boston Globe for 6.5 years, and this is sort of just a continuation of it. But Substack is awesome. It just gives you this sort of platform to write about anything you want to write about. I wrote a big piece a few weeks ago about container ships, because after the ship that was stuck in the Suez Canal, it was just a joy to research that and sort of look at the explosion in the use of container ships and how they literally are so big now that they actually they can't get them any bigger, because if they can be bigger, they can't dock them at ports. So there's just all this interesting stuff happening in politics. And I think if you read it, you'll really enjoy it.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you're getting outside of, the traditional stuff you would do at the Boston Globe, because you could do whatever you want. You can write about whatever you want. You can assign yourself whatever you want. And I think that's great for someone like yourself. But there's this argument that people were making yesterday. Maybe it's boring. I don't know much about it, but like not having an editor, good, bad?
I miss having an editor. I mean, it is helpful having an editor, and editors often can steer you in the right direction. And I think it's one of the things you lose a little bit by having a Substack. But I think what you gain in it is a little, being in an institution like Boston Globe, which was a great paper to work for. There is sort of a culture there that says you kind of have to write things on a certain parameters. And here you get to sort of, do a little things that are a little more creative and think a little more outside the box and do things that are, I think, a little different. And so I think from that perspective, it gives a broader perspective than when I was writing for the Globe. And, again, I loved writing for the Globe. It was a great place to work for. I think this is just a different way, a different approach. And it's also a little more personal, too. I talk to readers. I talk to the people checking out the thing. I get their input. I respond to their comments, and if they have things I want me to write about, I look into them and say, okay, let me address this issue that somebody thinks is worth talking about. So it's a more of a personal relationship you have between the reader and the writer, and it's for me at least, it's pretty exciting. And because it's an email that you get, it comes in your box. I mean, you've tailored it. You've got like a news update, like a what's happening, a today in history, pictures, videos, and it's just not something that you can put in your column. Because there's not space for it. Even digitally, they wouldn't make that space. And so the only thing I'm not here for is the music analysis, which you are really smart about, but I can't. I look at it, but I'm like, I feel so insecure. It's just videos. It's just good videos.
Yeah, musical interlude. All right.
Exactly.
So let's get.
I said one thing. I started the same history thing yesterday. I'll just say why, because I was on Twitter and I noticed that it was the anniversary of FDR's death. And my father, and I should have mentioned, my father would often talk about that this was the moment that from his generation, my father was born in 1931. He was 14 when FDR died. That it was this moment that everyone remembered where they were. It was like the Kennedy assassination for, the next generation. And he would often just talk about the impact that it had on him. He had no other president than Roosevelt. He was born, he was 2 when FDR became
Right.
And so I found myself going down this rabbit hole of reading the original New York Times article about FDR's death, which was extraordinary. I listened to a 30-minute radio a broadcast of FDR's body arriving at Union Station in D.C. I mean, I love going down these rabbit holes. So it was sort of fun to do that and, to sort of put it out for my viewers. Tomorrow, is it tomorrow or it's on Thursday is the anniversary of the Titanic sinking. So I'm looking forward to doing a lot of stuff on that. So it's kind of fun, actually.
I like it. And it's super important to mention. And let's just jump out of that before we get to the latest issue. When you've been talking about guns a lot, you've been talking about pretty much everything, but I have to talk with you about Fox News and what's going on. But real quick, I mean, you certainly talked about this in a couple of issues and talking about the analysis so far of the Biden administration first 100 days. And a lot of people, I'm talking to Jonathan Alter tomorrow, who wrote a great book about FDR. And a lot of people are making comparisons between Biden and FDR, maybe not as people, as men. I'm not sure that matters as much, but in terms of the agenda and the initiative, and I guess, I don't know how you'd shorthand it, but the expansion of government, the era of small government is over, I keep hearing. And I feel like it triggers people, big government and small government and all that kind of stuff. So it kind of, unfortunately, truncates the conversation. But I think it's super important to have. What do you make of the comparison between FDR and Joe Biden in terms of all the money being spent and all the initiatives that Biden is trying to pass right now?
I mean, I think it's actually kind of an apt comparison in one very critical way. FDR had the political power to push through his agenda, and Biden does also. If you look at where Democrats have been successful, it was in the 30s, the New Deal, because Democrats controlled the White House. They had a huge majority in Congress and the House. In the mid-60s, and they had, by the way, and in the mid-60s, they also had a huge majority, and they had some support from Republicans for things like civil rights legislation, and more support from Republicans than from some Democrats, like Southern Democrats who oppose civil rights legislation. Biden's in a similar position, even though he's a much smaller majority. And I've written about this a lot. What has changed in American politics is that the parties are much more homogenized, right? You had Southern Democrats who were, basically defenders of Jim Crow back in the 1960s, and you had Northeastern Democrats who, were supported civil rights reform. You had these two wings of the party. You don't have that anymore. The Democratic Party is a much more progressive party. And even though it's a small 50-seat, majority in the 50+1 with the vice president in the Senate, it's actually more cohesive, more ideologically cohesive, and more progressive than even 12 years ago when Barack Obama had 60 seats in the U.S. Senate. And so Biden can do more with 50 seats and a narrow majority in the House of like 4 or 5 seats than Obama could with a much bigger majority. And that is a byproduct of polarization, but also of the party just being more cohesive.
I feel like the conversation comparison between Biden and Obama about, everybody's saying Biden is, so much more progressive. And I'm like, not really. And the reason if he is more progressive, it's because he worked for Barack Obama. And let's be honest about the politics during, 2008 to 2016 versus the politics right now after Trump. I just feel like it's not really worth making too much of a comparison. Biden's more progressive than Obama was. I'm like, yeah, Obama.
Presidents aren't progressive or not progressive. It's a silly notion. They're not.
Okay.
Politicians are about what they can accomplish, right? I mean, obviously politicians have ideological beliefs. I don't doubt that. And I'm sure that if Barack Obama was president today, he would be doing what Biden is doing, although it'd be a little bit harder because he is a black man. So that does make a different situation. But the bottom line is that politicians, politics is about the art of the possible. And right now it's possible to pass a $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill. And it's also going to be possible soon, I think, to pass a $3 trillion infrastructure bill because Democrats are united behind this and because they understand you can't work with Republicans to get this stuff done.
Well, when you say Barack Obama had it harder because he was a black man, I think I want to illustrate that by this one point. I was interviewing a conservative columnist and Sirius XM during the Obama administration, and she criticized the Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, as saying the underpinnings were rooted in black liberation theology. And I was like, no, it's Mitt Romney's. No, it's not. It's a Heritage Foundation. But it was a ridiculous notion then. But today, if Joe Biden proposes something, nobody would see. He's a fucking wicked old white guy. And so you can't, like, there's a lack of suspicion there because of who he is. Does that make sense? That's what I'm trying to illustrate your point. They could pass the same policy and one person would be like, no, he wants to, give handouts to black people, and the other is not going to get that criticism as much, it would seem.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge factor. And I think it affected how far Obama was willing to push
anything.
But here's the bottom line to me. In 2009, there were 13 Democratic senators from states that John McCain won. And that was a pretty big win for Obama. 13 Democrats, okay? Which meant that you had 13 Democrats in states that had real reason to fear being reelected and fearful of some big liberal spending package, okay? And so you had all these moderate Democrats who basically trimmed the sails of what Obama and what progressives wanted to do. Today, you have three Democratic senators from states that Trump won: Joe Manchin, John Tester, and Sherrod Brown from Ohio. So what has changed then is that Democrats have a lot less to worry about as far as looking centrist. What they have to worry about is not, pissing off their base. And the only member that does have to worry about not, looking more moderate is Joe Manchin, which is why he is the proverbial pain in the ass for the Democratic caucus in the Senate.
Speaking of him, you're the guy to talk to about this because you're the most, in my opinion, one of the most logical, pragmatic thinkers. But I bet you even you don't have an answer. Two, what do you do to move him? Because I saw somebody yesterday. People are getting so desperate, and rightfully so. Somebody tweeted, like, is there nothing to blackmail this man with? Are there no pictures? Is there no dirt to get on Joe Manchin to get him? But I don't see anything to be done. People are like, oh, and these reactionary progressives on YouTube, et cetera, just do it, get it done. It's like, no, you have to have Joe Manchin. Manchin has to sign on. I don't know what to tell you. He has to. How do you get him to do it?
So, it's a good question. And I have a theory about what happened with the COVID relief bill that I think, deserves some attention a little bit because, he basically demanded certain changes to that bill. They were pretty minor. I mean, it wasn't a pound of flesh. It was more like an ounce of flesh. It was not a big deal. But what it allowed him to do was to say, look, I came in, I said, this bill is too progressive. It's way too much to the left. I'm going to, say here, we need to do X, Y, and Z. And by doing so, it allowed him to sort of argue, like, I'm sticking up for like my centrist, image, but also said to, I'm trimming the sails of progressives on the left. And actually, in a way, it kind of helped the bill because it made the bill look less like a partisan grab and less like a progressive, grab bag of goodies for the left and more of something that was like, actually compromise out with Democrats and made Republicans look more obstructionist. So I do wonder if part of what he's doing now is by being the stick in the mud, he's trying to, create an image of the bill as being maybe less progressive than it really is. I mean, the bill's pretty progressive, but maybe we'll seem less progressive because Manchin, got these concessions, but also puts the onus on Republicans. I mean, he can say, look, I didn't like these elements of the bill. I work with Democrats to change them. You could do the same thing too, but they're choosing not to. So I do think that I don't know what his final play is here. I think it is not a lock, but pretty sure that you'll pass the infrastructure bill and a tax reform bill because it's in everyone's interest in the Democratic Party to pass that, including Manchin. I saw him last week say that he doesn't support increasing corporate tax rate to 28%, but he would be up for 25%. That's a blinking neon sign of like Joe Manchin saying, here's where I'm going to compromise on this issue. So I do think that he is playing hard to get, but he will come around eventually.
What do you say? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. The larger issue on the filibuster, what it'll do on voting reform. And that I don't know. Right. And that I think, I still sort of think that he's not dumb enough to let Republicans kill a bill that would actually keep him in the majority for the foreseeable future. Same with Kirsten Sinema.
Voting reform would help keep him in office, you think?
Yes. I mean,
I don't know anything about West Virginia politics.
For example, automatic voter registration. If they can undo the GOP's efforts in Georgia and elsewhere to restrict voting rights, which they can do, all of those things are going to help Democrats in the midterm elections. And I think that from that perspective, even the gerrymandering, by the way, gerrymandering reform would certainly, could keep the House in Democratic hands in 2022. So I do think that is, it's in Manchin's interest to see that bill passed. I think he thinks it's also in his interest to look like a moderate and to be the sort of pain in the ass, if you will, in the Democratic caucus. And I think that's actually good for Manchin probably, and good for Democrats in general. It makes it look like Democrats are being flexible. It makes it look like they're trying to and Joe Manchin can say, look, I don't like this bill, but I'm willing to work with my Democratic colleagues to get something good passed. Okay. But, in comparison to Republicans who only work with us at all. So in a way, it sort of proves the bill looks more centrist because Joe Manchin signed off on it.
I want to talk to you about Fox News and Tucker Carlson and white supremacy and anti-Semitism. Do you know Jonathan Greenblatt at all?
Sure.
For folks who don't know, he's the head of the Anti-Defamation League. I've gotten to know him over the years and really grown to admire him. I think he is a very smart, calculated guy who is leading this organization, which I'm not sure if that's ever been a controversial organization, but I kind of feel like the ADL, it has, like, within the Jewish community, has it?
The controversy is mainly about Israel, always.
Oh, and whether or not that's a controversy I'm happy to discuss. But I like Jonathan a lot, and I admire his work at the ADL. And from what I've seen, I don't know what I'm missing, and I don't know about that Israel, where the controversy lies there, I can imagine. But he called for Tucker Carlson to be fired. And Brian Stelter on CNN asked him a good question, like, why would they fire their cash cow? They just gave him an extra show. And Greenblatt had a great answer about history. But the point is, when the smartest, most thoughtful Jewish folks or black folks are saying something's anti-Semitic or racist, or women are saying something sexist, like, you don't get to ignore that. And I'm glad that you're writing about it and you understand this history. And obviously you're Jewish and are sensitive to all those issues. There's another reason I really enjoy reading your stuff. But this is so reprehensible what Tucker Carlson's done. It's so overt. How do you explain what he is doing when he talks about replacement theory, the history of that, and why it matters so much right now?
Look, I mean, it's a pretty extraordinary moment because one of the most popular Fox News hosts is a fascist and a white supremacist. And I'm not using those words, I'm using them accurately.
Yeah, you're.
That is what he is spouting. And I was struck by this clip that went around a few days ago of him basically saying that Democrats want expanded immigration because it will dilute the political power of other Americans. And he means, of course, white Americans, because he's complaining about Hispanic immigrants, people of color coming into the country. And the argument here is basically, it goes against the most basic American principle, which is that we're not a country founded on ethnicity or race, even though we are, but we're a country founded on a creed, on the idea of the values and ideas embedded in our Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. But what Tucker Carlson is saying is no. What determines political power is voting, and voting is truly done, he sees it, along racial and ethnic lines. So if you have more Hispanic people in this country, that helps Democrats because Hispanics vote for Democrats. Never mind the fact, by the way, that Trump actually did better among Hispanics than he did 4 years earlier in 2020. And by bringing more Hispanic, it dilutes the power of white Americans who are the part of the Republican Party. So his understanding of politics is not that there are Americans to be persuaded or Americans of different ethnic and racial backgrounds who might coalesce around the same political ideas. No, it's that this is a numbers game. More of brown people and black people is good for Democrats, and more white voters is good for Republicans. This is a purely fascist argument. It really is. And it's also a white supremacist argument, because what he's saying is we should oppose immigration because it's going to dilute the power of white Americans. He's not even considering the possibility these Hispanic immigrants will come into America and actually support Republicans, even though, again, as I said earlier, in 2020, many of them did. In fact, in Florida, Cuban Americans, I believe, the majority voted for Donald Trump.
And they generally vote Republican, Cuban Americans, though, right?
Yes, they do. But you saw big gains among Republicans, among Hispanic voters. And yet in Tucker Carlson's worldview, It's all about race and ethnicity.
To be fair to Tucker.
Interesting segue.
And I haven't watched every moment of it, but I don't think he uses the word white or Hispanic. I think he sticks generally with the word demographics. He uses that a lot. They want to change the demographics to bring people in who will vote. I feel like that's his word. Am I missing that he does?
No, I noted this because you don't. Yes, you're correct. But although I've heard there are times when he has actually been a little more explicit in talking about Hispanic immigrants. But Fox News does not complain about immigrants from Norway. They don't complain about college students from Western Europe who overstay their visas. That's not their area of concern. Their area of concern is the border, and which is overwhelmingly immigrant. I mean, I think almost 100% immigrants from Latin America, right? And so that is the subtext.
And a lot of Iranian terrorists.
That's right. And Al-Qaeda and ISIS too, right? Sure. That's the subtext. Okay. And he doesn't have to say it for everyone to know what he means, because Fox News has spent, how many years now complaining about the border and about immigration from Latin America. So a charitable view would be that, oh, well, he's just talking immigration. No, he's not.
Well,
he's not.
What do you make of, I don't know if you read it, but what do you make of the head of Fox News, Lachlan Murdoch, dismissing Jonathan Greenblatt's demands and letter from the ADL that Tucker Carlson has to go? What do you make of that? Like, it's a weird, I always think about the audacity of a person who is arguing against all of the people in one category. If I'm arguing with all of the black people at my job, or all of the women, or all of the Jewish people, and I'm finding myself defending my point of view versus all of them, I'm always astonished by the audacity and the arrogance. All of the scientists, like, I'm right and they're wrong. That's how I look at that. But it's about money, obviously. But they fired Bill O'Reilly. They fired Lou Dobbs.
Well, they fired Lou Dobbs because it was a legal problem, because he lied so much about the Dominion voting that they had to get rid of him, because they would stop making liable statements that they were liable to be.
God damn, that was loud. It's still pinging in my ears.
Sorry about that.
That was Lou Dobbs actually texting you.
It was. He was like, F you, Michael. No, but it'd be funny actually if it's true. No, it's about money. And I think that, Fox is in a bit of a crunch, right? Because they've got competitors now. They've got One American Network, OAN. They've got Newsmax.
Are they taking a bite?
I mean, I have to think they are, especially since Trump has been promoting them quite a bit.
Yeah.
And, I find no other explanation for why you keep somebody like Carlson around than he gets ratings and he appeals to a certain segment of the audience. I mean, you can't do sort of the old milquetoast kind of, conservative dog whistles on race that you do in the past. You need to be a little more explicit. And I don't see any evidence that Carlson's arguments are hurting ratings. I mean, I do wonder about the advertising element of this, because that clearly is not.
Who are his
not advertising him? But I think they made this decision that they want to cultivate this audience that buys in these arguments. And the thing is, I think is also something very telling about what the language Carlson used. He talked about replacement theory, which is this, which by the way he brought up, not his guest, he brought it up, which is this notion among white supremacists that, Democrats want to bring, globalists, Jews, what have you, want to bring in these people from third world countries, ethnic minorities, racial minorities, bring them in to change to basically replace white people. And if you remember in Charlottesville, you had demonstrators, these neo-Nazis with tiki torches, basically chanting, "Jews will not replace us, and you will not replace us." So I think that was a wink and a nod to the white supremacists who buy into the replacement theory.
Dude, it is fascinating to see the form and messaging that white supremacy in America in 2020 has taken, and how effective it's been, frighteningly mostly on young people. Boy, I mean, if it weren't so scary, you could sit there and go, man, that is fascinating how in 2020 this strain of ideology, this ugly, horrible strain that we thought naively, some of us maybe was never going to come back the way it was, is back. It's different, but it is really powerful to see what is playing out. And I wonder how
Trump legitimized that. That's what he did. That's Trump's contribution to American politics. And I was talking to someone last night who grew up in the same community as Tucker Carlson in California, and sort of said to me, look, because I've always thought this was a cynical game that Carlson's playing, that he knows this is the way to get ratings and that he's just trying to, juice his numbers. And this person said to me, no, this is what they believe. This kind of strain of thinking about white supremacist thought is actually very pervasive in 70s, 80s, communities, in the 70s, 80s, in these communities in California, mostly along the border in San Diego, that area. And said what's happening is that Carlson's just expressing his inner views, and now he has permission to do it, and he does.
Well, I think people shouldn't forget that they had to fire. He had to fire his writer
for being a white supremacist. Yeah,
it's interesting that he fired him. Like, why did he fire him? Why didn't he defend him? I wonder what that guy said. I forget. But
he was posting on white supremacist websites. Because I think part of it is this: it's that Carlson needs to at least maintain the veneer, and this is, I think, partly also for his viewers. He needs to maintain the veneer that he's not a racist or white supremacist, right? I mean, there are certain Americans who will find the open embrace of white supremacist rhetoric appealing, but there are many who do not, who prefer that it be done euphemistically. And so I do think that for someone like Carlson, you can do the wink and nod on replacement theory at the white supremacists, while also not kind of fully embracing, putting a Nazi flag behind him, right? You have to sort of play both sides here. And I think there is some element here where he's trying not to, like this is what you said earlier, like not saying it's only in the power of white voters, right? Or that Hispanics will do that. But everyone knows that's what he's saying, right? The subtext is text.
Yeah.
So I do think that there's an element here of, he's trying to be, I hard to use the word nuanced about being a fascist and white supremacist, but that's kind of what's happening.
Yeah, he is being nuanced, but he's not. The code is very subtle. Like these rants that he's been making about replacement theory it's
not subtle though. I mean,
it's classic.
Right? I mean, I think if you listen to to that rant, I mean, you could even think it's reasonable. Oh yeah, like they're going to dilute our vote. If you really spend some time and you dig into it, like it's pretty gross. It's pretty friggin' gross what he's saying, and pretty racist.
Well,
but I imagine for some people they might say, well, I can sort of see the logic of that.
Well, it's just stupid. Everybody's trying to dilute everybody else's vote by convincing them that they're right. I want to take all those people that are voting that way and I guess dilute them by making them vote this way. I mean, that's the whole game. That's democracy. That's politics. You're trying to convince people that you're right and dilute the other ideology, but it's not.
He's saying it's basically the only way you dilute it is not through ideas, but through
people.
Race.
Like if you have a jar of people and yet it's mostly white people, they're diluting it by, I'm thinking of a jar because we dilute things in glasses and jars. I'm terrible at talking.
I know what you mean.
So let me get to some of your you've been writing a lot about guns, obviously, and I'm glad that you are. But I think that my two top line reactions are, generally speaking, are I get really annoyed when people say nothing ever changes, because at the state level, there's been major changes, and that is as a result of activists and organizing. I want to give great credit. And then when people make the other point that 80% of Americans believe in background checks or whatever, how come Republicans in Congress won't get on board? Now this one is just a matter of not having enough information. And my point is, and I want to know where I'm wrong about any of these things, if at all. No, it's not true of their districts. 80% of people in their district don't believe that. These people the Republicans are actually overwhelmingly voting what their constituents want them. It's about gerrymandering. Most of the people that live in these guys' districts want, everybody to have an AK-47. They're not actually misrepresenting their own constituents. It's just how concentrated we are in districts and even in the Senate and states. That's what it's about. I feel like we should stop citing the statistics of most Americans when it comes to these guys are voting what their people want them to vote.
I'm going to disagree a little bit, because I think that assumes that the outcome actually matters. In other words, the outcome on a background check bill matters. So it assumes that constituents of a Republican congressman or senator are going to, care. And maybe vote for let me rephrase that. It might assume that in a district in which Republican represents Democrats, obviously Democrats and Republicans, the Democrats might look at someone's vote for a gun control bill or background check bill and say, I'm going to vote for that congressman because he voted for something that I care about. That's probably not going to happen because we live in a very partisan environment. People vote, they vote team, right? So Democrats vote Democrats, Republicans vote Republican. And if you're a Republican, your thought, the thing is, guns are not, the issue of guns is a cultural issue now. It's a signifier. It's a cultural signifier. So if you're presented as being anti-gun, even if you're not, even if you support something that most of your constituents actually support, that's a liability. A liability could lead to a primary challenge. That could lead to you losing your job. So I think Republicans say, look, until a Republican loses their job, because a member of Congress, because they opposed gun control measure, then we're going to keep doing the same thing. And frankly, I don't know any that have. Most of them continue to oppose background checks that most Americans support, and yet Republicans still vote for them. Because at the end of the day, they're Republican, the voters Republican, the congressman's Republican. That's what they care about. And because, I think that there's no real benefit. You're not going to persuade anybody to vote for you because you support the background check bill. It just isn't going to happen. And with so few Republicans in states that voted for Biden, I mean, there's 3 Democrats in states Republicans voted for. There are 3 Republicans in states Democrats voted for. Toomey, Johnson, and Susan Collins. And by the way, Toomey and Collins both support background checks and voted for in the past. So I just think that they're making a political calculation that they're better off opposing gun control measures than possibly supporting it and losing Republican support because you're not going to get any Democrats to support you because you did that. And they're probably right, by the way. So what I am more bothered by is the Democrats, because actually right now, Democrats could pass a background check bill. It's already passed in the House. And, every Democrat would support it if there was no filibuster in the Senate. In fact, here's the crazy thing. The last time they voted on a background check bill was 2013. Guess who sponsored it?
Who?
Joe Manchin.
Oh.
Manchin Toomey is what it's called. 55 members of the Senate voted for this bill, okay? And including a number of Republicans. If you put this vote up on a majority-only vote in the Senate today, it would get 50 votes. It would get more, because you'd have Toomey, you'd have Collins, you might have Romney, although I doubt it. You might have a few Republicans who go along with it. It would pass. Majority support it. So Democrats could get rid of the filibuster and pass a background check bill that's incredibly popular and that would actually save lives. They could do it tomorrow, but they're not going to because the filibuster is sacrosanct and we can't get rid of it. So this is the thing that makes me a little bit crazy. Like, Joe Manchin supported this legislation. This is something he pushed for. Why not say, you know what, this is really important. This would actually save lives, and it would save lives. So why don't I support this? Why don't I say for this measure, get rid of the filibuster? It's not going to do that. And I think that's a real tragedy, frankly, and one that I find hard to defend. I mean,
So, but are you? But hold on, just to be clear, you're not blaming Democrats because it's only one man that's holding it up. You're making the case that Joe Manchin he should vote for this because he's been on the record, but it won't pass with just 50 votes because he won't allow for that rule he won't.
That's fair. But I also think that Biden has made a decision that he's not going to push on this issue. He's not going to push Manchin on this issue. I think, Schumer basically told Chris Murphy, Senate Connecticut, go find 10 senators might support it. And, it's possible he might actually. I don't think it's a crazy notion.
Well, meaning Republican senators as well. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, I think, look, like I said before, in 2013, a number of Republicans voted for background checks.
Yeah.
And the co-sponsor was, Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania. So there is some support. I don't think there's 10 members support it, but, who knows? But I will just say that I think, Democrats could, on a national level, Biden and Schumer could really make this a priority and could put some pressure on Manchin. And they're not going to do it because they want to. I mean, I get why, because they want to pass infrastructure. That's the most important priority right now. But I do think it's an unfortunate turn of events that you have a coalition right now in the Senate and the House and in the White House and supporter in the White House where you could pass background checks bill tomorrow. It's not going to happen. And that is, again, that's going to cost lives.
John Boehner's book tour is killing me.
Could care less.
So you want to pass and move on to my final question?
I mean, what John Boehner's trying to rehabilitate himself. And I just read today that he voted for, after shitting all over Trump for the past how many weeks, he voted for Trump in 2020.
Yeah, that was that. When I saw that this morning, I was, I had to do.
But fuck him. Seriously.
Yeah.
Like, honestly.
Well,
you're a hypocrite.
My big point has been that he is responsible for so much, including Trump. But more than anything else, the issues that we have with immigration, they will never be solved. Nothing will ever be perfect. But when the Senate, a very divided Senate during Obama administration, passed immigration reform with a bunch of Republican senators voting, it went to the House. And the story goes, my recollection is, John Boehner did not allow it to come up for a vote because it would have passed. And
exactly.
Because so all these caravans and all this border shit, so much of it was going to be fixed in that bill. Billions for border security that Republicans wanted. It's his fault. Immigration, more than any one person, it's John Boehner's fault. The issues that we see at the border.
I mean, look, I get it because, what's his name? Cantor had lost his seat. He was the number 2 guy in the
Eric
House.
Cantor
Lost his seat because he was seen as too progressive on immigration. But you're correct. Boehner should have brought that bill to the floor. And had he done it, you would have had immigration reform. But, look, Republicans have decided that they're not going to work with Democrats. That's the bottom line. And they're not going to. So that's where you are right now.
All right. So final question for you. How do you see these voter suppression laws that Georgia and many other states have passed playing out? You've got a couple different pathways, I suppose. You've got the lawsuits, like people like this guy, Mark Elias, who's really effective and maybe changing them that way. But then they get to the Supreme Court and then you think, oh, they'll die there with the conservative Supreme Court. Then you, of course, have the activism and specifically the money. So you've got the corporations, you got Major League Baseball and all these other companies. Now you have Will Smith and Antoine Fuqua pulling their production out of Georgia. Tons of stuff gets filmed in Atlanta, in Georgia, because of the tax incentives to bring the entertainment industry down. There's big studios down there. And so those are kind of the two pathways I see, the activism and the lawsuits. But it's really disconcerting. How do you see this playing out? Do you have any way to analyze what's going to happen here?
I think a lot of these bills are going to face some legal hurdles. I think there's no question about it. I think that the political science evidence is pretty clear that these things don't necessarily help Republicans much as you think they do. That they spur Democrats to vote, and in some ways, restricting people's ability to vote actually hurts Republicans. It's not. I just say an example of this. I remember talking to a guy in Montana who worked on the Bullock campaign, and he said to me, "Look, because they lost by like 10 points in that race, and that was unexpected." And he said, "Look, the problem in part was that in Montana, we mailed every single person in the state a ballot, an envelope, and a stamp, and it's a state that leans Republican. So guess what? More people voted. They voted Republican. We lost." So I do think that Republicans doing this in places like Iowa, for example, may be stabbing themselves in the foot. I will say, but of course, even if these things are don't make it past legal muster, I still think the Supreme Court. If John Roberts cares about one thing, it's restricting people's right to vote. He cares about that a lot, right? He wrote Shelby County, the case that gutted the Voting Rights Act. This is a big issue for him. So I don't know that you can see him as a savior when it comes to this one, especially since he's actually in the minority right now. He's more to the left considering on the Supreme Court these days. I think that the interesting thing to me is the corporate angle, right? You've got these. I thought the whole situation in Georgia.
Corporations should stay out of politics.
I'm sorry.
Corporations should stay out of politics.
Thank you, Mitch. I think that's a real interesting dynamic here because Delta, for example, initially had this sort of milquetoast statement where they kind of said, well, the bill's better than it was before, but it's not great. And they got hammered for it. And then they came out a day or two later and said, no, the bill's terrible. And then Coke said Coke first said the bill's terrible, which forced Delta's hand. And then all these corporations kind of said that these bills are terrible. And now they're all meeting apparently to talk about how to deal with this. So I think what's interesting about it is that Republicans have long relied on corporate support. And, I saw McConnell obviously coming out and saying, well, we're going to have consequences if corporations keep, coming out against these bills. What's he going to do? Raise their taxes? Give me a break. He has no arrows in the quiver. And I think that he's
take away their in Atlanta or in Georgia, they always threaten to take away their tax incentives or credits, right? But
they tried to do that, and they may still do it. And they do that. Here's my response: like, well, if I'm Delta, I'm giving money to Democrats, right? Honestly, why can you give money to Republicans if they're going to screw you out of your tax benefits, your tax breaks? I don't know. The thing is, corporations, lean Republican, obviously, for obvious reasons.
Tax
they like government, they don't like regulation,
labor.
But at some point, it becomes a branding issue, a branding problem. And clearly, a lot of corporations decided, you know what, we can't be seen as supporting this. Major League Baseball is the least woke organization, aside from maybe the NFL, that you can imagine. And they basically said, like, we don't need this aggravation. We don't. And I think that's a big issue for going forward. Do these corporations say, you know what, maybe aligning ourselves with Republicans is a bad move for us. It's going to hurt us. It may be good for us from a policy standpoint. From a branding standpoint, it's bad. And, that's certainly a possibility. I think Republicans have been a very dangerous game in pissing these people off.
Yep.
Very dangerous game.
Yep. I think that's probably the way it's going to play out. And, we'll see what happens. This corporations to state out politics and shut up and dribble athletes, like, oh, that is, it's not helping. Like, it's never going to change.
It's not winning. Like, it's not going to win. People don't buy that.
Major League Baseball didn't pull out of Atlanta as much because they thought that was the right thing to do. Is there were some concerns that key players wouldn't play and therefore they wouldn't have a game, and better to deal with the controversy of pulling out of Atlanta and having it in Denver than losing all of the money and all the attention because of few marquee players, who, by the way, I give a lot of credit to any athlete who speaks out and speaks up on these issues. I do, because they're making a shitload of money that they certainly, from Colin Kaepernick to LeBron James, they could lose that in a way too. I think it's important. I give them credit.
Look, the bottom line is that these athletes have a much bigger social media platform than the owners do.
Yes. Great point.
Do you really want a situation in which your players are basically going on Twitter and complaining about this? And they don't want that. Like, it's not worth it to them.
Yep.
And I don't think they're going to, and also, by the way, baseball's got a problem with, like, they want to attract young people to watch baseball, and they're not doing a very good job of it. You're really going to go on the wrong side of this issue when you're trying to appeal to young
so
people?
Out of touch. Republicans are so out of touch on these issues because they don't ever consider that Coca-Cola, Delta, and Nike all are like, dude, a huge percentage of our customers are black. Like, we're making money because of black people. Like, we're going to do, even if we disagreed, we're corporations. Even if we disagree with the black people, we don't give a shit. They are the people who buy our stuff. That's always been the case with a lot of these companies. They know who their customers are. They're not going to take away their votes.
It's not just the customers. It's also their employees.
Yes. Yeah.
And you're headquartered in Atlanta. You have a lot of black people who work for you. Do you really want to piss them off in supporting this bill? Do you think you're going to be able to
or women or gay people? Yep.
Yes. I'll tell you, in my previous life, I used to work for a lot of corporations. I did some PR work for a couple of years, and I was always struck by, I worked for an airline for a while, and the airline was like huge issue about LGBT rights. It was a big issue. And I was trying to, like, why is this a big issue for them? And it wasn't because of customers. It's because a lot of their employees were gay. A lot of them were. And so they basically, it was the same to their employees, like, we have your back. And also, you'll stay working for us. We can attract new talent. I mean, this is part of why companies take these positions. I mean, these are zero-sum organizations, right? But they conclude that being on the right side of this issue is good for them from a talent standpoint, a workplace standpoint, and a branding standpoint. So, Republicans are on the wrong side of this issue, and it's not helping them politically.
I love talking to you, and we barely scratched the surface on what you've been writing. So everybody has to go now subscribe to Truth and Consequences. That's Truth and Cons.
.substack.com. Please check it out. Even if you decide for free, I think you will. I really think you'll enjoy it, and you'll want to subscribe, as a paying member. But it's a lot of fun, and I hope you sign up.
There you go. Go sign up right now. Well, let's take just a moment, a beat for people to sign up. truthandcons.substack.com.
That's right.
And if you forget that, and you probably do if you're like me, it's in the links for the show notes. So go subscribe right now. Michael Cohen.
Don't pause. Don't hesitate. Go right now.
Go. What are you doing? What are you doing right now? You're on a walk. You don't want to stop walking.
You're playing with your children? Really? You're playing with your dog? No. Go to the computer. Sign up.
You're breastfeeding while listening to this podcast. Good for you. That's great. That's a great thing.
Somebody have a 3-alarm fire. Fine.
You're in surgery. What are you doing listening to a podcast in surgery?
Driving a car.
Did you see that guy who showed up for a court date virtually while in surgery?
I didn't see that. I saw the cat guy. I showed up for court.
That was very funny. No, the judge was like, "Are you performing surgery? Can we do this we could do this another time?" He's like, "No, I can do it."
That's
and then
surgery right there.
Well, then the craziest part of that video is you hear someone off camera yelling, "Clear! Clear! We're losing him." And he's like, "Anyway, the property dispute, I'm here." Michael Cohen, thank you very much.
Always a pleasure, Pete. Thanks for having me.
Stand up.
And thank you for listening, everybody. That is today's podcast. Episode 330 is in the can. Thank you so much for listening and for supporting. Tell your friends. Give it 5 stars on Apple Podcasts and write a review. Those are both really important things to do for the podcast that you like and your support. If you really like it and you listen to it a lot, please support me in the shed with a subscription. Go to patreon.com/PeteDominic or just click on the paid subscription link in the show notes, and we will go from there. Hope to see you Thursday night. If you are a member of our community at our Hangout, check us out at it. How about the Discord platform, which is a really cool app that allows you to chat with folks who are in the community that you don't know and connect with. And a lot of people have made friends there, so check it out. Thank you very much to the listeners who created that and support it each and every day. All right, speaking of listeners, the great John Carroll. Take it away, buddy.
Keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense and you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town, just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up. We got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up. You got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.